My name is Ginger Chinn, and I'm from the Utah Inland Port Authority. And today we are talking about supply chain. And supply chain has become such a hot topic with the COVID-19. And we are joined by a wonderful group of panelists. And I'm just going to introduce them real quickly and then allow them to talk a little bit about the industry that they're in and why they see what the supply chain disruption has done to them in particular as they are working through business. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to have you raise your hand first, and then Jack, then we'll have you start, Jack, with the introduction, or the overview. So I am Jack Hedge. He's the Executive Director of the Utah Inland Port Authority. Then we have Weston Labar. He's joining us from Long Beach, California. And Weston is the CEO and President of Harbor Trucking Association. So thank you, Weston, for joining us from California. I have Jason Fowler of Freightlink, and he's going to talk a little bit about freight forwarding and what that means as they've seen goods and movement of freight. And then John Fletcher is from Freightlink as well, and John does customs, so he will address any questions that we have related to customs. And then we have Brian Souther, and he is the CEO of Blacksmith International. So Jack, I'm going to turn the time over to each one of you, and I'm going to start with Jack. And Jack, can you talk a little bit about the inland port and what you've seen with supply chain currently right now and the disruption that you're witnessing?
Sure, Ginger, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Everybody on the panel, thank you for being here. And everybody who's looking in, we appreciate your time and your interest this morning in this topic. I think I said something the other day about it. I don't think I've ever heard the term supply chain used more than I've heard in the last several weeks. I think what has happened over the last several weeks has really brought into very stark relief just how valuable and how critical, actually, our logistics system is to the U.S. economy, to the global economy. I would argue that one of the few areas of the economy that has continued to function through all of this has been the logistics system, in a very real sense. The COVID outbreak has, I think, pointed out to a large degree just how fragile and how vulnerable the global supply chain is, how stretched it is, how long it is, and how that has compounded some of the issues related to this. And so, one of the things I'm anxious to hear from the rest of the panel today is what they see in that regard, what they see changing, what they see the future of the supply chain looking at, and what does that mean to businesses in Utah and the rest of the U.S. So, thank you, Ginger.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn it over next to Weston Labar, and we've asked Weston to join us. Again, he's in Long Beach, California, where a lot of the ports are, so he's got a lot of connection with Long Beach Port, the Port of Los Angeles, as well as the Pacific Northwest as it relates to the movement of goods. And Weston brings a lot of information to us. So Weston, I'm going to turn it over to you. I would love to hear the state of the movement of goods as we're seeing ships coming in. So yeah, please take it away.
Thank you, Ginger, and thanks for having me. I love Salt Lake City, and hopefully next time we do one of these, I can actually get on an airplane and join you all. My name is Weston Labar, CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association, and our members move probably 2/3 to 3/4 of all the containers that come through America's West Coast ports, from the Port of Seattle down to the Port of Long Beach. And I think Jack hit the nail on the head, but there's 3 words I would use to describe our supply chain right now. We are definitely fragile. We are codependent, which is what makes us fragile, but we're resilient as well. And I think that's the part that we need to focus upon. Anytime we have an issue, are vulnerable. We have these issues of the supply chain breaking down. And because we're so codependent, the entire supply chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So if the ocean carriers, for instance, which is what we saw in March, start blank sailings or canceling vessels leaving Asia for the United States, it then impacts our marine terminals, which they change their gate schedules, which impacts truckers' ability to go in and pick up or drop off containers, which then impacts shippers, the folks that own the cargo, the importers and exporters' ability to move goods. And so when one link of the supply chain breaks, we all find ourselves being vulnerable. And I think that's when people around the world understand how important the supply chain is, because as dysfunctional as we can be sometimes, we operate in such a manner where very few folks realize that all the chaos is happening behind the scenes. But when we have one of these disruptions, whether it's been a labor disruption in 2014, 2015, a major shipping bankruptcy in 2016, or now this COVID pandemic in 2020, what we've seen is folks inland can't export their goods, or you don't have Barbie dolls and G.I. Joes. G.I. Joe's still a thing. You don't have those on your shelves for the holidays. And that's when I start getting calls from people that are in the U.S. Congress from the inland saying, oh, where are G.I. Joes? And I can't export my corn. And so what we've really tried to work hard on is partnering with other members of the supply chain where we can in a business-to-business fashion to make sure that we smooth over those issues and make sure that the American consumer doesn't see the impact either in their pocketbook in the form of price increases or in scarcity. And I think we work with many of the business owners who are importing and exporting to help them understand what we can do for them during these times and understand what their needs are to try to keep that fluidity. That's what's so important. But as we move forward, I think that there is going to be a major call to action for all of us. We must work together. And I said this on a call last week, but ask not what your supply chain can do for you. Ask what you can do for your supply chain. Because if we all take that in consideration, we'll be able to come out of this much stronger.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And we have a time at the end for questions and answers. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions as it relates to cargo in and out. Jason, I'm going to turn the time over to you. Jason is the CEO of Freightlink. And first of all, for those who are on the call, explain what a freight forwarder is and some of the disruption that you've seen in the supply chain. So if you can talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Ginger. Jason Fowler, the owner of RNC International and Freightlink. We're a domestic and international freight forwarder and customs house broker. We are a non-asset-based carrier, basically. So we are very much like a travel agent for freight. So we have the contracts and the know-how to really get your cargo moved from, from origin to destination. The state of the supply chain, it's right now, it like Jack was saying, it is very fragile, but it's very fluid as well. We go from, these huge rush right after Chinese New Year for cargo, and then we get more blank sailings, and now we're, a lot of people have stopped ordering. We really try to educate our customers and our clients to truly try to partner with them to make sure that they communicate to us, to their factories, so they understand some of what's going on in the industry, so they have some good lead time. But when you have, I think we're up to 400 blank sailings so far this year, and we've got 44% capacity cut in air freight. Your air freight rates, what used to come for $2 a kilo is now $15, $16, $17 a kilo. So it's really pricing non-essential cargo right out of the market. So, we've got a lot of essential cargo moving, but it's a lot of the non-essential cargo that's not moving right now.
So our audience right now is mostly small businesses or businesses in general that are looking to see how their business has been disrupted by supply chain disruption, or if one of the manufacturers that they work with and they have relied upon is out of business, how that impacts them. So I think you've used a term here called blank sailings. Can you explain how that really does impact a small business? I don't think a lot of people really understand what that means. So can you talk about that just real quickly? Absolutely.
Yeah, blank sailing is when the carrier in one of what they have an alliance. So it's usually like 3 or 4 carriers in an alliance. They usually go from once a week from port to port. They'll remove one of those sailings, and so it's kind of a way that the steamship lines can keep the prices stable, and they're keeping their ships fuller. So if you have, you've loaded a container or need something to go, it might get rolled to the next week, or if there's another blank sailing, it could go for 2 weeks. So if you have something that you're depending on getting here at a specific time, then maybe you have to all of a sudden think of air freight rather than ocean freight, which is much, much more costly.
So the consumer, that's when you start to see things on the shelves missing,
exactly.
Essentially. Okay. So we've been joined a little bit later by Mike Stockwell, And Mike is the owner of Mountain West Container Services. So Mike, we are just now going around doing quick introductions, talking about your business and how this has been impacting your business. So Mike, if you want to take just a minute to talk a little bit about Mountain West. You're on mute. Nope. We're going to give you one more shot and then I might hit Brian real quickly. Technical difficulties, huh? Yeah, it's still on mute. So I'm going to just jump to Brian. We'll see if you can work on your technical difficulties just a little bit. So now, Brian, talk to us a little bit. You're a small business owner and you have businesses in Asia. I know you've worked a lot with India. You have some here locally in Utah. Love to hear from you as a business owner on the disruption of the supply chain and how that's impacted you. Oops, muted.
Okay, there we go. So for us, our clients are also the small businesses. So people are contacting us to get their production runs going and then get those products back into the U.S. And so we feel these disruptions really, like, very clearly. They hit the bottom line. We had a month or slightly over a month of COVID shutdown in China, following Chinese New Year shutdown. We did get a little reprieve with some overlap there, but nevertheless, when people are waiting already for those goods to come in, and then we have a shutdown in China, that causes a disruption. Then we come here and we have a disruption in the US. And so all of these things result in small businesses, who I'm going to assume most of the people who will be watching this are in that category. That hits the bottom line quickly because they don't have a product to sell, and it's not the lack of movement in the supply chain doesn't matter to them. What matters to them, that's our problem. What matters to them is that they just don't have anything in inventory to sell, and so these businesses go out of business. And so at Blacksmith, what we focused on, and we started this long ago, but our focus is to make sure that we have backup sources, that we have the ability to switch quickly to domestic sources. It's not always possible because raw materials still have to come in from other places, but to the extent that you can, you need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared so that our clients still, again, get the product in the warehouse or at their customer's doorstep, whatever that may be. And then just one quick thing I want to say, that I think that all of us share this concern, and everybody's brought up pieces of it. There's all this interdependency in the supply chain, and there's no transparency. So if I have truckers waiting for cargo to come into port, and those truckers do not have visibility into what's happening at the factory in China or at the port in China, that causes problems. And you can take that concept through the entire supply chain. If I have a brand who needs goods made, and they have no transparency into raw material availability, that causes problems. And so when I think about how we solve this and how we provide a better service and provide longevity to our end customers, it's all of the people in supply chain working together to create transparency that allows us to function on a better, more open system.
That's great. That's really helpful. Mike, are you on now? Nope. We might not get to hear from Mike. So,
Ginger, can I add something, if that's okay?
Yeah.
So, and I want to thank all of my colleagues on the Zoom meeting here. That I think they've all made great points. I just want to kind of boil something down, because something Jason said and something Brian said, I think it really needs to be put out for the folks on the call. So we talked about the blank sailings, and just from a rudimentary standpoint, imagine you have a 9 a.m. flight and you have to get to LA by 1 o'clock for a meeting. but the plane's half full, so they tell you they're going to put you on the 6 o'clock flight instead. So you never have any sort of confidence in whether or not you're going to get where you need to go on time unless it's a very busy travel season. Well, that's an issue. And logistics is really the new manufacturing. And to Brian's point, even if you make something in America, there's a very good chance you're sourcing parts from all over the world. So I always use Apple as a great example. You buy an iPhone, and an iPhone, it'll say designed in California, assembled in Brazil, or assembled someplace. It's because they don't know where all the parts came from. You've got hundreds and hundreds of components that come from South Korea and China and all over the world. And so even making things in America, buying American, many of those components are coming from all over the world. So when a small business owner who's manufacturing something, or even a large business owner who's manufacturing something is dependent on that 1 p.m. arrival for that meeting, and they don't have those components, it creates a backlog on the shelf. I just want to say one of the big things that we're a part of here in Southern California is the Port of Los Angeles launched something called the Port Optimizer. It was GE Transportation and now Wabtec who's developed it. And it's supposed to be just that. It's supposed to be an engine that's able to take data from everybody, sanitize that data and spit it back out in a consumable fashion for everybody to use. So the trucker, for instance, or the shipper knows when there's a delay at the manufacturing plant in China, when that could delay a shipment from the ship, if there's a late vessel call at a port or a rolled or blank sailing, if there's congestion at the terminal, if there's enough appointments, it takes all that into consideration and helps create that visibility. I think one of the things I would say, and this is where that call to action comes into play, is when we have these opportunities, we can't complain about the inefficiencies of the supply chain if we're not willing to participate in the form of data. And I think for everybody on here, if you do ship, if you are a consumer of transportation and trade, you should be encouraging all your partners to participate in any sort of data programs, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to help create that visibility. It's going to help with better forecasting. It's really going to help drive down the cost of the business consumer, because you're not going to be paying for the inefficiencies. We'll be able to make things optimized, and that'll create lower costs for businesses and lower costs for consumers.
No, I think that's a great point. And, you know, we're all in this together, and the solutions are going to be collective when we're all in this working together. No, thank you, Weston. John, I want to switch the time over to you just for a second. So you work with customs. Talk to us a little bit, and you're on mute right now. You want to take yourself off, but talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in customs and how things are being held up and how you're helping eliminate some of those problems.
Yes, hi, I'm John Fletcher. I'm a customs broker at RNC, and I work with Jason there. We have been seeing delays with customs, but it's actually going surprisingly well, which is really nice. But they've been stressed for a little while with all the changes. You know, a big bureaucracy that when they get changes, like with the tariff, the Chinese tariffs, and everybody has to adapt to those and adjust their systems, and so when you throw this on there, it stresses an already stressed system. So we are seeing more delays than normal. You know, everybody has to be a little prepared for that, and then the other delays in the supply chain also don't help with that. Let me see. You know, and did you want to start going into? Let me see. You know, why don't we move on?
No, okay, no, that's good. So one of the things yesterday afternoon here in Utah, and I'm just kind of tell Weston this, we're in a gubernatorial election right now. And so there was a debate yesterday that was hosted by the Salt Lake Chamber and EDC Utah. And it was really fascinating listening to the candidates that are interested in being governor. They all addressed supply chain. They were all talking about logistics. And I think that this is the first time that this has ever been brought into the light like this. And I think it's all because of this COVID-19. But what was really fascinating is a lot of their focus is nearshoring and bringing manufacturing back to America. So I would love to hear, especially, I'll start with you, Brian, maybe Weston and Jack, your thoughts on what that would do. Is that a reality that we can really focus on? And is for our small businesses and our businesses that are really focusing on bringing manufacturing back. What's the reality there? So Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I definitely have a perspective on that. I think the reality is somewhat different than the rhetoric. You know, I think that saying, you know, made in America or bring manufacturing back is a worthwhile thing to do. But we have to look at the reason, because there has to be an economic driver behind it that works. And so we started about 3 years ago on our project to start creating capacity in the U.S. And we've done that. We've built up capacity. We're putting out lots of product, but we don't view it as made in the USA is better than made in China or anywhere else. What it is it's a switch in the paradigm from manufacturing where the cheapest labor is to manufacturing as close to the consumer as possible. And the reason that we want to do that is because when brands have to project far into the future in order to determine what their manufacturing lot sizes are going to be, because they're coming on a steamship from China, they have to make all kinds of wild guesses, and normally they're wrong. That's why you see 40% of all the apparel, for instance, brought into the US is discounted. At some point in that chain, that will be discounted items that will take away from a brand's margin, away from their bottom line. So how do we fix that? Well, one is the transparency I talked about, but two is having this local for local manufacturing, so it's fast, so that I can say to a brand, don't go and order 500,000 units just because you think that's the best guess you can make. No, let's make it a possibility for brands to order the right amount, the amount they know they can sell, the amount that they know they can sell without discounting, without landfilling, the hundreds of thousands of tons of imported product that gets landfilled every year. We need to have a demand-based supply chain, not a supply-based supply chain, if you will. It has to be based on real market data. We need to have real transparent connections between the brand, the factory, the transportation, and the consumer, so that we're making the right amounts of the right kind of product as close to the consumer as possible.
That's a good point. So Jack, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, bringing manufacturing back, and what's the reality?
Well, I think Brian hit it on the nail on the head. It's the economic reality is a lot of the production that goes into making the final product, though, simply doesn't exist here. And so there's always going to be this huge amount of material shipped into the United States to support manufacturing and distribution here in the United States. And it is, I've heard Brian use this term before. It's a shift from a supply chain to a demand chain, and it's making demand drive the market rather than supply drive the market. And it's a more rational system. It is a more agile system to do that. And I do think that Utah is very well suited, given that as that shift continues to occur. Because of our geographic location and our transportation infrastructure, we can become a center for that manufacturing, and then that bringing the raw materials in, manufacturing it here, assembling it here, and then shipping it back out from here. Given our location, given the infrastructure that we have, we're very well suited for that change as that comes about. And then supporting the deployment of the technologies that allow for that transparency that we've all been talking about, I think is something that is critically important, and the Port Authority can take a leading step in that direction. So I agree with what Brian's saying, and I do think that's a very real probability of where manufacturing is going to go in the United States.
Can I make one more point too, Ginger? Sorry to just jump in, but you reminded me of something that I didn't touch on, because I agree. We have, when I look at what we manufacture here in the U.S., the first thing that we do is we're looking for U.S. suppliers for that material. Maybe we hit that 30% of the time at the moment. But 5 years from now, we expect to hit that 80% of the time. And we're seeing other manufacturing spin up that's going to feed our manufacturing, our end product manufacturing. But the last point I wanted to make was that, again, for me, I'll manufacture large runs in Asia and India and China, and I think that fits this system just fine. It still allows a brand to right size their manufacturing. As soon as they know that demand is more than the US can handle, that's fine. Then we go and do that the next run somewhere else. But we have the technology that allows for the transparency. And that's technology that we've been working on and we're building now, but it allows us to share information seamlessly through a network of factories wherever they may be located on the globe. And it sounds, Weston, like something similar to what you guys have done. I'd love to talk with you more about that another time.
Yeah, Weston, I would love to hear your take on this as well.
Hey, Ginger, could I just insert a point? So there is a difference between producing domestically and near sourcing.
Yeah.
So you can do near sourcing, like in Mexico, Costa Rica. We bring in a lot of medical supplies and that from Costa Rica, which is considered near sourcing.
No, thank you. That's a good point. So, yeah, Weston.
Jason stole a little bit of my thunder, but I think it really goes back to a point I made earlier. You first have to define what you mean by manufacturing, because as I said, a company that's an American company, when people buy from Apple, for instance, which is a well-known brand and commodity, we're buying American, but almost everything in that phone is from someplace else in the world. And it comes down to what is your idea of manufacturing? When the 2016 presidential election was happening, there were small businesses in Erie, Pennsylvania, and that's where I grew up, was Pennsylvania. They were interviewed because they were a small domestic manufacturer. They were super excited about the idea of manufacturing coming back to the United States. And then they interviewed them 2 years later, and their costs had gone up because all the components had come from other places in the world. And with tariffs, it impacted them drastically. And so when we talk about the supply chain and when we talk about manufacturing, I do think that there are opportunities to manufacture things in Mexico and move them via rail up through the central part of the United States. I think it's very unlikely that we're going to start doing the manufacturing of components to the way we used to in America, because I live in the People's Republic of California. It's very difficult to do business here. It's probably why I have a job. People need someone to advocate for them. But if you look at what goes on here, we continuously deal with labor regulations, environmental regulations. The governor just issued an executive order that said if somebody has COVID and they're working, then it's deemed that they probably got it in the workplace, and so insurance has gone up. You've got all these extra costs, and until the American consumer is willing to pay the price increase for many of the costs to manufacture things domestically, in the sense of manufacturing the way people think of it, we're not going to be able to get there. So I do think there's opportunities to do more final assemblance here, the way that the automakers do. I do think there's ways to add more jobs in a manufacturing sense here, but there's always going to be a need for the global supply chain, and this is a global economy. So I think we need to stop thinking at it in the form of the 1800s or 1900s, the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing. We're never going to get back there. Where we can get is reestablishing more localized assemblance. And with e-commerce, we have so many distribution centers and opportunities to create industrial hubs and create industry clusters around the types of demand hubs that we have to make this make a lot of sense. I just think that people need to understand the economics behind the transition. And the fact of the matter is we're not going to be smelting steel anytime soon.
Yeah, you make a great point. It is an economic issue, and we've got to address it that way. So we got a question in the chat that I'm just going to chime in right now on, because I think it plays well with the supply demand question. So our friends with Salt Lake City Economic Development said, is there a financial benefit to a demand chain versus a supply chain for companies? And so, I know, Brian, you've been talking about the demand chain versus supply chain. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think that the demand chain, first of all, if it doesn't provide an economic benefit, it doesn't work. Like there's no adoption. But if you think about the ability to, we brought up the automakers. The automakers have done a great job. If we're going to look to any industry to see how this can be done, they've done a great job because they have been able to take. They've been able to take technology and do just-in-time manufacturing of their products. So that's a huge benefit. But that doesn't necessarily branch out to other industries. It certainly isn't in apparel. It certainly isn't in the consumer goods that you go to the store and purchase every day, not most of them. But if you can take the waste out of the system, which is what the demand chain is about, taking time out. Time is very valuable when you're talking about manufacturing or logistics. You're taking time out of it. You're taking waste out of it, which is where you get your discounts of consumer goods. And you're allowing people to operate based on what they know they can sell. That is a huge, huge benefit.
Yeah, that is a huge benefit. So, hey, Weston, earlier you mentioned the port optimizer and utilizing data and technology to help this whole supply chain and the global market. I'm going to ask both you and Jack, but I'm going to start with Jack. Jack, how do you see Utah in particular leveraging, the technologies that we can take advantage of, such as the Internet of Things and, the 5G and some of those opportunities that are just right in front of us that we can just readily take advantage of?
Well, I think it's important for Utah to sort of take that leadership role and promote the development and the deployment of these technologies that support advanced manufacturing, that support advanced communications, that support automation and autonomy, and even renewable energy and zero emissions technologies, things like that, because the logistics industry is moving very rapidly in that way, and change is happening exponentially. And Utah needs to be at the forefront of that. We have an opportunity to help develop that kind of supply chain, which is more efficient, more cost effective. Just to be blunt, even though there's more capital cost, say, for example, for a zero emissions truck, and Weston can speak to this, they're more cost effective to operate over time. And so you get to a break even and a return on that investment that's pretty substantial over time. So I think there's an opportunity for Utah to position itself and take advantage of those changes. But I think there's also an opportunity for Utah to take advantage of and position itself as a hub for the types of technologies that Weston was talking about and that Brian talked about that provide data transparency and data access for manufacturers, for shippers, for truckers, for warehousemen, to see where things are in the supply chain, to see where those goods are, to see where their box is, to know where their box of tennis shoes is, because Weston, I don't think they do make G.I. Joes anymore. I think it's more about tennis shoes and t-shirts. But to find out where those things are and know where they are, know where they're going to be, and better balance their supply chains as well. And so that's another area that I think Utah can play a role in. We have a very robust tech industry here, data industry here, doing those kinds of things, working with them, and how do we integrate the port optimizers systems, the blockchain-driven system of someone like a Maersk, those kinds of things. I think are things that we can do and things that we will see happening and coming very rapidly. I think that this current environment that we're in is going to drive a lot of people to that, and it's going to have helped us make that economic flip that needed to be made. This is a tipping point.
Agreed. So Weston, tell us a little bit about some of the other technologies that you've seen and how a business can take advantage of those.
Yeah, well, I want to, echo a lot of what Jack had to say, but we've been an advocate for years now for the notion of a national port community system, the ability to digitize and optimize the supply chain. And the fact of the matter is ironically, we operate pretty efficiently the way we do things today, but really for us to get where we need to go and to get really towards that idea of a demand chain, we need to do a better job of forecasting. And I'll give you a great example of what we deal with. Many of the marine terminals on the West Coast now employ an appointment system. However, you think about this both on the inbound and outbound cargo. On the inbound, the container comes off the ship, and then at some point in time, it'll be made available for an appointment. And when we're very busy, for instance, you get 4 days of free time at the terminal. Well, sometimes you may not be able to make an appointment till the 5th day or the 6th day, at which point in time, you're already paying your Blockbuster late fee for not picking it up. People know what Blockbuster is, right? Okay. I'm dating myself maybe these days. But anyway, so then you have an issue around trucker congestion, around whether or not you're going to be able to get the goods to the actual cargo owner in the right amount of time. You have congestion, you have increased cost from the trucker wait time perspective. And then you have the same issue on the outbound side when you have an empty piece of equipment. And equipment imbalance is a huge issue, especially once you start to go inland. And that's where I think there's a huge opportunity working to connect the West Coast seaports with an inland port like the Utah Inland Port Authority. And what we really need to do is digitize that information, because currently you need to make an appointment at many of the terminals, actually at all the terminals in Southern California, to return an empty container. So what happens is you need to make an appointment 3 or 4 days before you plan on returning the empty, but you don't know where you can return it yet. So you need to make an appointment at 3 or 4 different marine terminals to be able to return that empty. And then right before you go to return it, usually within 18 to 24 hours, you're told, take it to Terminal A, and you have a whole lot of wasted inefficiencies. If we could add the extra component, which is the shipping data, where they want that empty container to go, now all of a sudden you can use forecasting, as opposed to making 3 appointments for the same container that screws everybody up. The ocean carrier, the steamship line, can direct where they want that container days in advance, and you can begin to use data for forecasting. I've been telling my members that I believe if they're looking for a place to expand, if they're looking for a place to take what I would call a very educated and solid business chance, Utah is a great place to look right now. And I believe that for our members, the ability to move things and via short haul rail or via a relay system from the West Coast ports to a place like Salt Lake City, where then you could transload it, and I think much more efficiently, much more inexpensively, and without some of the same nonsense we deal with in the People's Republic of California. It makes it a better business decision for our make it a cheaper product for the American consumer. But the whole idea of the port optimizer came out of this concept that many of us were pushing several years ago. And I thank Gene Soroka at the Port of Los Angeles for actually investing millions of dollars in trying to make it happen. But it's the idea of, we all have this data and information. If we share it, we'll make each other that much more efficient, and we can continue to optimize the way we deliver cargo to make it more effective, more efficient, and less expensive.
That's great. So recently I heard Todd Bingham of the Utah Manufacturers Association say that, for his manufacturers, or just manufacturing in general, the supply chain is no longer just a department in your organization. It really needs to be the area that companies focus on the most right now. And so for the businesses that are on and listening to this webinar, give us a takeaway, and what would be the number one thing that a business can utilize right now in these times of a pandemic, when we're in a little bit of a crisis and supply chain disruption is happening? What's the number one thing a business can focus on to optimize their supply chain right now? From your perspective, you guys are in the business all the time, you understand supply chain. So I will just kind of go around and allow you guys to weigh in just a little bit, but I'm going to start with Jason. Jason, you work with a ton of businesses. Give us a tip, a takeaway that a business can utilize.
Yeah, the most important thing, especially for small businesses, because the small business is probably going to use a freight forwarder. Make sure the freight forwarder that you're utilizing, you're in constant communication with them. Same with your customs house broker, because the freight forwarder will give you some knowledge, about port closures, or maybe a way you want to reroute something, or some other options that you don't know about. Communication is absolutely key. If you can forecast, if you have a rolling forecast, 6 weeks out of what is coming, communicate that to either the carrier or the forwarder that you're using. But it's really all about keeping everybody in the loop.
So utilizing knowledge and the expertise of your freight forwarder is probably one of the best things a business can do. Is that in your opinion?
Yeah, especially for small businesses that don't have their own logistics departments.
Oh, that's great. Jack, what do you think a small business should, or a business in general, should focus on?
Well, I think any business should really take its supply chain and its whole distribution system, both on the supply chain and the distribution side. Deep dive into it, really get to know it, understand where its vulnerabilities are, its weaknesses are, understand where its strengths are. Do a real SWOT analysis of your supply chain and of your distribution network. Frankly, weaponize your supply chain. I heard somebody describe Amazon's basic business model as weaponizing the supply chain. And I think that's a very apt way to think about it. It is a tool. It's a very powerful tool. And it's something that you have to understand if you're in your business. You need to know where your stuff is coming from, and you need to know where your stuff is going, and you need to know how it's getting there. And so I would say really dig in, really get to know what your supply chain is, and figure out how to optimize it.
So I'm going to see if we can hear Mike again. Mike, let's give your microphone one more shot and see if we can hear you. We really want to hear all about the container yard, so would love to hear from you. Yep, we can't hear you. And I can attest, he's got some great information as it relates to trucking and container yards. But
Mike's just shy. That's what it is.
Yeah, I've never known Mike to be quiet, so this is unusual for Mike, right? So John, give us a tip that we can share with businesses that are tuning in right now. What is your take? Oops, you're on mute as well.
Okay, thanks for that tip before I talk too long. So one of the things, and Jason said this too, is to get a hold of your freight forwarder and customs broker about this stuff. The freight forwarding side, it helps with the logistics part, but the brokerage, the customs brokerage will help, guide you through the process of whatever it is you're bringing in. There are a lot of aspects to a thing that you need to know about, from duty, from extra regulations by other government agencies like FDA, EPA, those kinds of things. And you can get a lot of that information from the broker, and especially if it's a new product that you're bringing in. You don't want to surprise when the container hits the port. And all of a sudden, you realize you need a whole lot of paperwork to get that to clear customs, and then it holds things up in an already stressed system. So the broker can help you a lot and guide you in that process. And also, the seller, if you're working with a new seller, they will also know a lot of that process from their perspective. They'll know what kind of paperwork they need, what documentation they will need to clear customs. So communicate with everyone you can, really, the forwarder, the broker, the seller, and make sure you know what you're bringing in and what kind of you have a good idea of what's expected, what kind of regulations you have to face when it gets here. So.
What are some of the things that you're seeing being held up by customs right now? We've heard all kinds of hiccups via customs just because it's already a labored system, but talk to us a little bit about some of the things you're seeing being held up.
Well, I'm not seeing a specific product held up. It's more of a random thing. It's just a luck of the draw kind of thing. As far as maybe exams that are happening. But I think one thing maybe that's pertinent to talk about are the PPE product, the personal, actually the masks fall under that. And they're a lot easier to get in now. The FDA has lightened up their regulations. So some things that used to be a little more difficult, time consuming, are now getting easier. But that being said, on the masks and other products like that, make sure you're still getting the right documentation, because the FDA can always come back later and say, hey, show us all the documentation. So.
Oh, thank you. So I just called Mike. I thought, I really want to hear what he has to say. So Mike, I've got you on speaker and I think we can all hear you. If you want to talk a little bit about your tip for small businesses.
Yeah, I apologize. Technical difficulties. I'm a mover, huh? As far as the local trucking, looks like the horse is not road. So the one thing I would like to add is that delivery warehouses, receiving warehouses, can make a big effort in helping us keep our drivers safe and healthy. If you have a truck company, whether you're one driver or 50 drivers, if you start having drivers show up positive for COVID-19, it could affect your whole barn, and it could affect you for 14 days plus. I would like to see what we have here at our depot out west. We have sanitizer available. We've got gloves and masks for all of our staff. We try to keep the 6-foot apartments off. It's very difficult when you're exchanging paperwork. But it'd be nice to see the last leg delivery warehouses implement those same type of rules. Not sign delivery receipts, either do it by text or electronic or just stamped. Barriers between the driver and the receiving warehouse staff. So I know at the UP, they have told us that where the drivers go to the queue and they fingerprint in information. The UP is telling us that they're wiping that down after every ride. I can't say if that happens or not, but at least those things are in place and they should be happening. But the one takeaway, if you're a warehouse in Salt Lake City, it would be very nice from the drivers' if those things were implemented as a safety requirement, as a thing mandatory.
Okay. So it's still a little difficult to hear you, but to recap, Mike was saying that really take care of your truckers and make sure that everything's sanitized. And one of the things that the Inland Port we've been working with Mike on is how do we help the truckers in and out of Utah be safe and healthy, and what kind of resources we can provide for truckers, whether it's a place to stay, whether there's restaurant options for them to park their truck and get a nice meal, and then the sanitation efforts too. So we really appreciate your efforts on that. So let's see, and I think next we were going to go to Weston and ask about the opportunities for small businesses and what your number one tip would be.
Yeah, well, I echo Mike, thank God. I think the biggest thing you can say is teamwork makes the dream work, and partnerships are so important in this industry. I can't tell you how many times I'm surprised, even by working with major Fortune 500 companies, that we would all easily recognize their logo. And when something's going on at the port, they have no idea of how it impacts their overall supply chain, how it impacts their business. They come back, and who do they call on? They usually call on their trucker. So I think it's so important to have folks within your supply chain that are true partners, that you really trust and that you believe in, that you rely on their professional expertise. And one thing that I always say is make sure in any sort of agreements that you have with your transportation partners that you are asking for things like KPI. You have data that's going to help you. You want to be able to forecast those things. And to what extent the ability to integrate systems is amazing. We're trying to work very closely with our partners, whether they be rail, marine terminals, to integrate trucker systems with their systems to do some of the things that actually have been beneficial for COVID-19, because when you have data integration and you have a sense of data automation, you don't have to have human interaction, which means that you have social distancing built into the way that you conduct business. So many of the efficiency measures that we've looked at have actually been great safety measures during this time. But make sure that you have great partners and that they're able to advocate on your behalf, and they're able to do it using empirical data as opposed to anecdotal information.
Yeah, great. So Brian, I'm going to turn it to you now as a small business owner. Talk to us a little bit about how you would help a small business owner out, some of our friends out there. Mute. You're muted.
All right, sorry about that. I think the thing that we need to do, first of all, if there's small business owners who are watching this, is define your supply chain. That is really important. I think that because we all talk about supply chain in different ways, and we're all different parts of it, right? So I think sitting down and really mapping out every aspect of how you're getting a product and all of the touch points, the milestones that happen from the day you place an order until it arrives at wherever you need it to be at your warehouse. Map that out so that you understand who the players are. We tend to manage that entire chain of events for our clients, but not everyone. some people come in at different points and we help in different ways, but for us, you know, we're the ones who are interacting with the freight forwarders and making sure that that customs, no one can be an expert on every part of this. You have to rely on partners, but I think making sure that you have someone you trust, and Weston, you said that before, someone you trust who's managing every single touch point of that supply chain. Freight forwarders are so important. It's so important to understanding duties and understanding what your different options are for bringing stuff in. Things like that. So the main takeaway I would say here is understand your supply chain. Don't get caught somewhere like many small businesses do with extra duties that they weren't expecting, or something held up because it wasn't labeled correctly, or a manufacturer that can't get the raw materials that they promised they would get. All of these things, the more you know about where your product's coming from and how it's getting here, the better off you'll be.
Good. So I think for me, you know, just listening to you, panel of experts, I really had, you know, 3 key takeaways that I think we can share with our businesses. One is have great partners, have great relationships, and understand how the whole system works. Secondly, it's utilizing tech and utilize technology, understand the data, use the data to tell your story. And the third piece is mapping out your supply chain and understanding where things are going, and then utilize experts who know how to map and understand how you get goods from one place to the next. One of the things that we have noticed, and we're just about out of time, but I want to touch on one more thing, is one small thing can create a ripple effect. And here in Utah, we know that truck parking has become kind of an issue. And I think that Weston, you touched on it as well in the California area, and where trucks park and where's a safe place to park. So Jack, if you have just a minute, I'd like to, and I guess this would be you speaking on behalf of Mike as well, because Mike's been working on this issue as well. Can you talk a little bit about the truck parking, and before you do, take yourself off mute?
Look, I took myself off mute.
Good job.
All by myself. Yeah, so you know, truck parking is an issue. It's an issue everywhere. It's an issue all over the country, and it's an issue here in Utah. We have some very large and robust truck parking facilities in and around the inland port here in the Salt Lake City area, as well as throughout the state, but it's not enough. It's simply not enough. We just here in the Salt Lake City area, we find between 100 and 300 trucks per night, basically parking on the street, nowhere to park, nowhere to go. So we think that sort of infrastructure is vitally important to support the trucking side of things, the long haul truckers that are passing through here to and from the Midwest to the West Coast and vice versa, as well as local distribution, local service here in our market, our region. It's something that we are looking at as the Port Authority. How can we try to advance that? How can we help that? And it's important that they have a safe place to park where they're not at risk, but their cargoes are safe and secured. It's important that they be able to get services, be able to go to the bathroom, be able to get a shower, be able to get a good night's sleep, be able to get their truck serviced if necessary, wheel and tire repair, other truck services, truck wash, things like that, get something to eat, find a place to sleep. All those types of things are very important. So the more we can help build out that system, that network, the better off we'll be. It is also important that we do this in conjunction with our partners. So we've been talking to, through introductions made by Mike and others, companies like Secure Space and others around the U.S. that are doing this in different locations around the U.S. and how we work with them. They have tools and technologies available to get this information out to the truckers, so the truckers know where to go, hours of operation, can reserve a space and whatever. Those kinds of relationships and those kinds of opportunities are really important. And so those are just some of the things that we're doing with the Port Authority.
Yeah, Ginger, if I could just add, I would absolutely 100% agree with Jack. The truck parking infrastructure across the nation is abysmal, quite frankly. And that's why we have turned to partnerships with folks like Secure Space, because when we can't necessarily create new zoning regulations, we can't necessarily create more land that our folks can tap into. And in areas where the states or local municipalities have, in many cases, actually moved in the other direction. Nobody wants a truck or a warehouse in their neighborhood. They all want their goods within 24 hours of ordering them off Amazon, but nobody wants the truck parked in their neighborhood or the warehouse down the street. We've partnered with folks like Secure Space, not just to help provide parking to those who need it, but also to create found revenue sources for our members who may have excess land. And looking at things much like Airbnb did in the hospitality and travel industry, being able to help those who have the resources continue to afford and maintain those resources and provide a safe and sanitary work or situation for the drivers who need to find that space and create it in an online, digital, easy, accessible platform. That's the way that I think the future of this industry is going. But I think, again, it's a call to action at a time when most hearings or panels I've spoken on in the last few years have been on why trucks are bad and why people don't like trucks, and now everybody wants to hug a trucker. We need to remember that coming out of this. We need to say, what are the types of working conditions we want to create for our frontline transportation workers to make sure that they're safe, they have sanitary working conditions, they have a hot meal and a shower, and we're not villainizing folks because they've been pushed out into neighborhoods because we just don't have the infrastructure for them.
No, that's so good. And I think there's so many things that we can do during these times. And then coming out of these times, we can be a little bit smarter and be more articulate on how we're going to move forward in helping the supply chain just locally and globally. I want to thank you all for your time. We assembled such a great panel of experts, and thanks for taking the time to share the information about supply chain and logistics. And I want to thank Derek Miller and Heidi Walker and the staff at the Salt Lake Chamber for shedding light on this and providing resources for their businesses during these times. And if I want to just kind of end with this, if you have any questions about the supply chain, you need some help from some freight forwarders, be sure to just reach out to the Chamber. They'll get you to us, and we can answer any questions that you may have. So I want to thank everybody for participating today. So thank you. Goodbye.